Welcome to Theology Thursday, a weekly podcast dedicated to cultivating theological conversation amongst millennials. I'm your host, Ryan Mock.
I'm your co-host, Connor Grubbs.
And I'm the co-host, Jonny Grubbs.
That took you a minute.
I couldn't remember my name.
Well, so how is everybody?
Oh, I'm doing fine.
Fantastic.
That's good. Yeah. Well, Ryan is a working man now. Not that he wasn't before, but his job is requiring more hours of him now.
Yes, I'm kind of transitioning into full-time.
Yeah. At Freedom Square, where dreams come true. I was this morning, as I was getting ready for the next person to come in and take the shift, I was going through the nameplates.
Yeah, and my name is there now.
And I saw, right, all in a row, I put mine in, and right behind it was yours and then Paul Callie's. And I was like, how did this happen? And how have we not all gotten fired yet?
We got a shipment, like, yesterday of a whole bunch of nameplates. But yeah, I was working with Paul on Monday. Yeah, it was Monday. And we were roving together. And I'm just like, Paul, how did they let us become security guards?
Yeah.
I have zero security experience. I don't know what I'm doing. But alas, here I was.
Hopefully they don't listen to this podcast.
Yeah. They do. So
it's okay. We do a good job.
It kind of last week that kind of threw us off Ryan's work schedule because usually we record on Wednesday nights. And so I just interviewed Billy. We didn't even have an intro or anything. Like it would just kind of we just threw that interview out there. But we're gonna work on that. We're actually gonna be like talking about structure and things like that, and just kind of making it better. Tightening things up.
Cool.
So,
cool.
Ryan, what's your subpoint for the week?
I just recently finished a book. Actually, I finished it last week, but obviously I wasn't here last week to tell you my subpoint, my book I just finished. I told you all about one book I read on youth ministry called Giving Up Gimmicks by Brian Cosby.
Presbyterian Excuses for Boring Youth Ministry.
Yes, exactly. I read another book about youth ministry called Sustainable Youth Ministry by Mark DeVries. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, DeVries. And it's more on like...
is this Presbyterian Excuses for Small Youth Ministry?
No, Sustainable Youth Ministry. And he is Presbyterian. And this has had more to do with like the structure of a youth group and how to maintain a sustainable one, give it architecture, So that was a good one. And then I'm reading a book right now.
Wait, architecture? So you have your students like build things?
Yes.
I knew it was going to be boring.
Absolutely. And so right now I'm reading through a book by Albert Mohler. It's called The Conviction to Lead.
He's a Baptist.
He is a Baptist, but he's also Reformed. So that's a good book. It's on leadership. I figured I need to diversify my reading. I read 2 books on youth ministry. I need to read a book on leadership. I'll probably read a book on counseling. So all that stuff to prepare me for my job. So not being security guard, but being involved in youth ministry.
My subpoint is Avengers Infinity War. We haven't gotten to talk about it on the podcast since it came out, but it was really good. I was...
Rip in peace.
Rip in peace, Batman. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't, watched it yet. But if you want to go on Slot Talk Official, that's where I do like movie reviews. That's for the pagans who want to see content that I create. We don't talk about Jesus on that channel. Actually, that's where Theology Thursday originated, though.
That's right.
It was Slot Talk Official. We did a couple videos. We did like a video on Doctor Strange and his worldview, and we talked about like Chance the Rapper and Lecrae and are they Christians? And it was kind of fun, but it eventually evolved into this. And
I like this.
Yeah, I like this too. And so we kind of keep the movie reviews and stuff separate. But if you haven't seen Avengers Infinity War yet, go see it. And I think Jonny can attest to the fact that even if you're not like a Marvel fan, this works as a standalone movie. You should still go see it. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually really enjoyed it, which surprised me because I didn't like Avengers. And I don't like a lot of Marvel movies. I'm very selective about my Marvel
Boo.
connoisseur. But it was good. I liked Infinity War.
Now, Jonny has a really lame subpoint this week. It just it pales in comparison, especially to mine.
He already told us, and we're like, wow, Jonny, really? You're going to say that? That's very lame.
Because we kind of... He's at the bottom of the rung. He's the co-host, so we kind of have to, like, check on everything
honestly,
he says before he says
this may demote him to co-host.
Yeah. Well, and you notice his voice is a little bit quieter, and that's because we give him the bad end of the microphone because he's the co-host. But you know what? Go ahead and say it. I mean, not that the audience cares.
Well, for the record, this was to compensate for the fact that they know that my subpoint's the best subpoint. But I mentioned in one of the previous podcasts that my wife and I are expecting our first, and we found out today.
Your first what? Finish the sentence.
Our first child.
Okay, thank you.
First pizza.
Your first dog.
Our first child.
Okay, good
Who
stuff.
happens to be, we found out today, is a girl.
Yay!
Ooh, I'm just kidding. I can't wait. I'm gonna have a
That's
niece.
your niece.
I know.
Connor.
It's so exciting. I can't believe it. I have a niece.
Her name will be Zoe. We're still working on a middle name.
I love that name.
Her middle name should be Ryan.
This is my first time hearing my niece's name on air. Wow.
Her middle name should be John Calvin.
No.
Zoe John Calvin Grubbs.
You want her to go to heaven.
Look,
so.
I'm... Ooh, well, you don't get to decide that. God does.
That's why he should baptize her.
Yeah, sprinkle that baby. You're technically a Presbyterian minister now, right? Do you have the authority to sprinkle Johnny's baby?
Well, I'm not ordained, so I'd say no.
Oh.
I could point you to people who can, though.
Well, why don't you sprinkle her anyway?
Are you gonna sneak baptize your niece? Is that your goal?
Yeah, I'm gonna break into the apartment one night.
A little bottle of water.
You guys are asleep.
That's the creepiest thing ever.
I'm not even a Presbyterian. I don't know why I would do that, but just for kicks, just in case.
Better safe than sorry, right?
Oh my god.
Or, you know what? Maybe I'm going to have to bring a bin and do full immersion. Because...
Oh my god.
After I read her the Baptist Faith and Message 2000.
Nah.
Okay, well, this has been interesting. It is May, which is...
May Appreciation Month.
May Appreciation Month. What is May, Johnny? Tell us what May is.
May is Mental Health Awareness Month in the U.S.
Only in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think it's different month in different places because it was very recently instated as Mental Health Awareness Month by one of our most recent presidents.
Don't forget to project.
Yeah, by one of our most recent presidents. So it's only been Mental Health Awareness Month officially in the U.S. for the past 3 years. So,
okay.
3 or 4 years.
So happy 3rd anniversary of mental health awareness.
That's not exact. I wouldn't quote me on that, but it's been around for less than 5 years.
We will quote you
definitely.
on that.
Yeah,
because we expect you to come prepared. Now, that being said, we are going to spend actually a couple episodes talking about this on Theology Thursday, and I know we've seen like a variety of different topics and like styles of episodes in the show so far. Sometimes we've done like interviews about like ministries that we want to highlight, and sometimes we actually talk theology in a more academic sense, like Calvinism or baptism, and we're going to have more of that. But sometimes we just need to talk about like things like this that are relevant, that are current, and talk about from a biblical perspective, from a Christian perspective, how to address this. And I know this is something that is very close to your heart, Johnny, and that you even emphasize in your youth ministry, because it's something that maybe isn't talked about enough in the church. So we are allowing you to begin that conversation on Theology Thursday this month.
I appreciate the opportunity.
So go ahead, co-host.
Yeah, well, this is our third year rather, as a youth group, third Mental Health Awareness Month that we're actually recognizing within our curriculum at the Refuge, our student ministry. And I think it came to my attention about the second year that Mental Health Awareness Month was a real thing that was being pushed. The Gospel Coalition, which is actually a really reformed group, all they did was release a blog post with stats. And at the end of those stats, they said the church needs to talk about this. And that was it. And I don't know if they've published anything since then, but that's a pretty big deal because a lot of people assume, especially from the Reformed movement, that people think that this is an issue that can be solved by prayer and Bible reading alone, which I'm about to get into. and that's not necessarily the case. There are many people in the church, and even in more conservative, reformed facets of the faith, that have a more nuanced approach to this issue. So, but I just want to give a few statistics that may surprise or not surprise us, but it's something we need to talk about and hopefully do something about over the next few years. But a third of Americans and nearly half of evangelical fundamentalists, or people who consider themselves born-again Christians, believe prayer and Bible study alone can overcome a serious mental illness. The survey also found that most Americans, 68%, would feel they were welcome in church if they were mentally ill. So one of those is discouraging, the other one's pretty encouraging. The fact that 68% do feel comfortable, that's more than 50. But that's also kind of concerning for the remaining percentage.
Well, yeah, I'd want that percentage to be even higher than 68.
Right, absolutely. So the 35% agree with this statement, which is scary. With just Bible study and prayer alone, people with serious mental illness like depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia could overcome mental illness. 35% agree with that statement. So I think that that's a lot of misinformation. I believe in the authority of Scripture, and I believe in the power of prayer. And as David dealt with anxiety and what we might even call depression in the Bible, he often dealt with that through prayer, as we see in the Psalms. However, Ed Stetzer says, all truth is God's truth, and we must look at this in a more nuanced way. So I still believe in the authority of Scripture and the importance of prayer.
That's good, Johnny.
However, that's a pretty bold statement to say that those things can help you alone. Now, those things are going to come into play if you're going to have successful, odds against mental health issues. Prayer and Bible reading are going to come into play, but obviously, you're not going to stop hallucinating because you read your Bible.
Right, I think the key term there is mental illness. That word illness is like, we're not. I mean, some people go this far, but most Protestant Christians are not going to expect to have their cold or their flu cured by reading their Bible. So, why would this be any different?
Right. I think that the people who say that prayer and Bible study alone can solve this problem, they're thinking of this in terms of a spiritual issue, and it is a spiritual issue, in my opinion. But that's only a spiritual issue. It has no physical aspect at all.
Right.
But you say it's an illness, which implies there is some physical aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with. I mean, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but it has to do with your brain activity and chemicals in your brain, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And I've learned a lot about the physical dimension through even some of my own experience and through working with students who have struggled with these issues. But you're exactly right. And anytime I address this issue, I automatically say, well, it is a spiritual issue because of that first word, mental. It's dealing with your mind, and that is something that's given to you by God, and it's very connected to the rest of your spiritual being. And we see this even in Deuteronomy, in the greatest command, to love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart. It's part of it's part of your spiritual makeup. So it is a spiritual issue, but that doesn't mean it's not a physical issue as well. So 54% of Americans say that churches could do more to prevent suicide, and 64% among evangelical fundamentalists or born-again Christians say this as well, that the church could do more. So I'm not poo-pooing the church or anything like that. I'm just saying a lot of us don't talk about this, and in conversations, actually one of the most powerful things, because a lot of students that, not just students, but people that commit suicide end up doing so because they didn't talk about it, and nobody said it was okay to talk about it. So those are kind of my preliminary remarks about mental illness in the church. I don't know if you guys want to chime in.
Well, I think talking about it, that goes into kind of some of the, from just the perspective of secular psychology, some of the treatments that are available for things like this, and really the two main ones would be psychotherapy, which is kind of meeting with a professional counselor and simply put, talking it out. But that counselor is coming in with, professional tactics for guiding those conversations and helping the person work through it. And most often with suicide, that's the most important place to start.
Absolutely.
Is talking it out, is starting that conversation. And sometimes that might need to be with a professional who understands, some of the things that lead to those thoughts processes. And then there's biomedical therapy, which is medication, which has a negative stigma to it, but is also sometimes necessary and beneficial.
Right. I know several people with mental illnesses, and medicine's a big part of their recovery. I also think it's important to point out that these are secular counseling, I want to say, techniques or methods, and that stuff works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there is a academic element apart from the spiritual stuff. Now, when you throw in, I think that every treatment plan is more successful with prayer and Bible reading. I firmly believe that because I believe in the power of Jesus Christ. So you're going to have a lot more success if Christ is in the picture.
Which is true about any aspect of our life.
Absolutely.
So that's why,
So, but I think a lot of times we ask the wrong question. We often ask, okay, so we have a depressed person, what's going to be their thing? Are they going to need medicine, or are they going to need some talk therapy, Christian counseling, or maybe some time in certain passages of scripture and prayer? And a lot of time it's a combination. Some people refuse to use medicine, and they may need to have sessions of therapy their whole life, each week on a weekly basis. Some will use medication to get past a majorly depressive state, and then they find that through therapy they can maintain it. It's such a nuanced issue, but almost always it's more than one solution. It needs to be thrown at it, and that's what more people are discovering, is that there needs to be a more holistic approach to the issue. So this is what Ed Stetzer said about it. This is I took some selections from an article that I read for school that I thought was so helpful. This is what Ed Stetzer says. He says, part of our belief system is that God changes everything, and that because Christ lives in us, everything in our hearts and minds should be fixed. That's true. But that doesn't mean we don't sometimes need medical help and community to do those things. One might wonder why we can't just read enough scripture or pray enough. Why can't that cure us? But the reality is that in some cases there are physical, chemical, or physiological issues. Yes, prayer can help. And yes, God does still heal in miraculous ways. But more often than not, more prayer and more faith are not the only remedy for mental illness. Medicine can still be needed. Most people would agree that in many ways we are in an over-medicated society, and I don't deny that. But that is a separate discussion for another day. Just because we need to be careful in how we prescribe and administer medication does not mean we should be afraid of medical intervention entirely. And I thought that was a super balanced approach, because I think that it would be wrong for us to say, society's not over-medicated, here's some medication. We can't do that. I think we need to admit that there is an over-medication going on, specifically in mental health pharmaceuticals. That doesn't mean they're all bad, and that doesn't mean that they all don't help. So, both are true. We need it, and yes, people are getting over-medicated. So there's problems to solve on both sides.
Right, yeah. Medicine is not something that we should necessarily be afraid of. I mean, God gave us, it's something God gave us, in a very broad understanding of that. He made the plants and the herbs and the stuff and the people. So
He made the stuff.
He made the stuff, man.
Yeah, so because there's this tension, though, and this is where it comes into a conversation, is the faith community is unsure of how to handle this tension between, maybe mental health professionals aren't doing the best job in certain areas, or maybe there is some over-medication, and so how do we, as the church, open up conversation about these issues, and how do we balance that tension?
So how do we do it, Johnny?
Yeah, I wish I had the answer. I think first and foremost, and this is why every May we do this, and this year we're specifically focused on anxiety, and we're looking at Psalms that deal with anxiety. We're looking at the issue of cast your cares upon the Lord because He cares for you, from 1 Peter. Some translations translate that to anxieties, cast your anxieties upon the Lord because He cares for you. And so we're looking at it from both perspectives. From a medical perspective, not too much because I'm not a doctor, but just saying it is a medical issue that can be a problem. But we all deal with anxiety to some extent. That's kind of the framework we're taking this month. But regardless of what aspect of mental health that we choose to focus on in a given year, one thing we do is we create conversation. And I had a really good small group with my students afterwards, and one of them even was able to say, I was diagnosed with such and such, and they felt comfortable talking about their own journey with that in the conversation. And I think that does, we got to stop being afraid of talking about it. I think that's step one.
Right, because you're not going to be able to find what the next steps are if you don't have those conversations. Mm-hmm. And if the church doesn't feel like a safe place to start those conversations, then the church isn't doing their job.
Right. Yeah, and we should actually be at the forefront of talking about these things as God's people, because we want people to find healing and we want people to find hope. That's the great message of the gospel, is the hope that we find in it. And so to me, there is a disconnect there, but it's one of those hot button issues. I mean, you don't necessarily have a month in your congregation where you talk about mental health or sex, or there are a lot of different.
You just said sex.
You should see their faces.
I wish you had word out.
No, but I mean, there are so many issues.
You're gonna have to tag this as explicit on iTunes.
There's so many issues that we might think are taboo or have a stigma that actually wouldn't, and we might actually overcome them more if we just talked about them and didn't feel weird about it. So I think that's a huge part of it.
Totes.
Are you going to talk about sex at your youth group then?
Why did you bring it back up?
Let's save that for another podcast.
No, I like what you said though about Christians should be at the forefront of this issue, and I'm under the conviction that our God is Lord over every realm of culture.
Right. And
so, us Christians, we are the light on the earth, and so we need to be in the forefront of all of that, and in all realms or spheres of culture. I think we should be forefront, and that includes mental health. So.
Yeah. So one theological aspect I do want to, since it is Theology Thursday, I do want to tackle about this that may seem like it doesn't need to be talked about, but unfortunately it does. Is mental illness a result of sin? Okay, so tackling that question is really interesting, because there have been times where in certain cultures and certain periods of time where if somebody had a mental illness or something, or even a physical disability, the assumption was it was because of some terrible sin they've committed. We even see this in the New Testament, right? Where and you would think that nowadays that nobody is thinking that, especially Christians. Unfortunately, people really are. I mean, it's the same way I think a lot of people were kind of surprised when they realized, oh wait, like white supremacists and like neo-Nazis, that's actually a thing. Like, that's still a thing. And we're kind of naive to believe that people don't think that way, but unfortunately, people have always thought these ways, and people always will. And ultimately, any disability, be it mental, physical, it is not a direct result of sin. All right, that's not a consequence like God said, okay, they're going to have, depression because, like clinical depression, because they committed this sin. No, it's an indirect result of sin.
Yeah. Right.
When Adam and Eve sinned and brought that sin upon the earth, we live in a fallen world now, and it's a world where illness and disability exist.
There's sinning, and then there's the curse of sin, which is just the brokenness that came from Adam and Eve's mistake and the sin in our own hearts. And so there's that. I think we have to balance that, because I think, like, in general, no, it's not the result of something you did. Like, it doesn't have to be your fault that you're depressed. But It can be. The reality is that sin can permeate some of the issues of depression. And if you think about it in other ways too, say you made some bad choices that led to alcoholism or something like that, that can actually lead to, medically speaking, to depletions and serotonin and all these kind of things that would cause you to be depressed, where you might not have otherwise been depressed if you had never gone down that road, So sin can come into play, but it's not like, okay, you have some sin issue and therefore you're depressed.
Yeah, I agree 100% with all that. Another thing that I've heard, I don't know if any of you all have heard this, but I believe I've heard this before. Some people say that maybe mental illness or maybe even physical illness is a result of demonic activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that before.
Which, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Whew.
Yes.
Well, it's again, that's really hard to say. William Cowper was you may know him because he was a Reformed dude, but he oh gosh, I don't remember the year anymore. It's been forever since I read his biography, but he wrote some hymns and stuff like that, but he was horribly depressed all the time. And there was a lot of evidence to suggest that it was because he was abused and he didn't feel worthy. Well, if you think about unworthiness, a lot of us would say that's a lie of the enemy, right? Because Christ says that we are worthy.
Yeah.
So, and that way, I guess you could say that it's demonic, or it's
in a certain sense it is, but in a certain sense, you're not demon possessed.
Exactly.
And especially we could say that as Christians, you have the Holy Spirit in your heart.
Exactly.
And you can't get demon possessed like that.
Right. Exactly. And so to say, like, can people see things because of demonic possession? Yes. Can people see things because they have a chemical in their brain that produces too much of it, and your brain starts to think things into existence that aren't there? Yes, both are true. And so, again, it's another thing where I think that it could be part of the issue, but maybe that's not necessarily the norm.
Right, exactly. And I think that's kind of been a theme on Theology Thursday. I'm sure it'll continue to be, because it's a theme that comes up when you're talking about theology in general. A lot of theologians have had a tendency to make sweeping generalizations, and the fact is, with a lot of these questions that we end up asking in conversations like this, it's rarely a simple yes or no. It's rarely that cut and dry.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So,
and that's when we get into foolish controversy.
Let it begin.
I think that, practically speaking, when you ask a question, what can we do to solve this problem and bring it more to the forefront? I think doing things, for me, I'm just being obedient to the Lord. I feel like I need to bring this, to my flock, to my immediate flock, which are my students. I think it'd be cool if we saw more pastors in the month of May, now that it's kind of a thing in the United States, or is becoming a thing, here's what I would say. We have to be careful because, and I've heard many pastors in great wisdom say, they get asked questions about mental illness and they say, I'm not a doctor. And so I can't say too much. Their job is to say how prayer and Bible reading can help. That's their job, is to say how can. But what I would say is do a series on the issues and how you can address them from a spiritual perspective, and then maybe have guests come in and speak about where people can find help. It's kind of funny because in Bible college you learn you get a list of helplines and stuff like that, and your counseling courses and things like that, and then we kind of forget that and leave that aside as pastors a lot of times. But if in the month of May people knew where they could find help, not just that month, but if that was the month where
only in the month of May.
No, but if it was promoted, this is where you can find help. And if churches were raising money for counseling, I go and meet with donors just to have money in the bank to pay for students' counseling if they need it.
He said money. We're going to have to censor that too.
Money's the root of all evil.
So, referring kids to counseling has been a huge part of,
I think another thing to add to the whole pastors thing, that pastors are, in a sense, they do function as counselors, but they do not, I don't believe they have the extensive training of a biblical counselor who's devoted to counseling. So that's also to be something to be aware of. If you have serious mental illness problems.
Absolutely. And pastors should have a huge referral network. Mine's pretty small because I like to know the people a little bit that I'm referring to. But I have a couple of really good counselors that I can refer to because, like you said, what I like to call what I do with students when I counsel them, I call it triage counseling. You know, in triage, the nurse kind of assesses, okay, you know, what are your vitals, where you're at, and maybe they can kind of get an idea of what their issue is and pass that information on to the doctor, so that the doctor is better prepared to deal with that issue. And so a lot of times I'll take notes and I'll figure out what a student's dealing with, and I'll figure out who the best referral is, and then they already have the groundwork that I laid in that initial session with the student, but I'm not presumptuous to say that I can continue that work. Somebody more qualified needs to, and that,
right.
You know, so.
Yeah, the pastor will only get so much training on counseling.
Right. And they could obviously choose to do more, but I think that the pastoral role is so needed and it's so unique that it can be good to keep those things separated if you can. And so it's good not to do therapy with somebody you're also trying to pastor. I think you can tackle it better if you have pastoral care and counseling coming from two different angles.
Absolutely.
So it seems to me like the general consensus and kind of takeaways are one, like therapy and medicine are not bad things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we need to recognize that.
Those things could be from the Lord, if
right.
you think about it. So.
Now, you should be wise about how they're used. All right, you shouldn't rely on them too much. Also, that Bible reading and prayer sometimes alone do not fix that problem. Even though they are an essential part of success in any aspect of our lives. And finally, that the church as a whole needs to be more active in this conversation.
Absolutely.
I was listening.
Good job, Connor.
Do I get a cookie?
Yeah.
We're going to have Waffle House later.
I would suggest, too, if you want to go, I can't fully endorse any other, organization, but I can't fully endorse myself either because we're all fallible. So, but I will go ahead and plug them.
Except for me, but yeah, go ahead.
And the Pope.
But I will plug them just because right now they're one of the leading organizations in mental health issues. And I looked at their reports. I think that I don't want to overly criticize them. They're not the best, okay? There could be better ones out there, and I've thought about that. But right now, to write Love on Our Arms, great organization, especially in terms of awareness and saying, hey, let's talk about this issue. There's a great book. Again, I plug it with a grain of salt. It is basically a memoir called If You Feel Too Much, and it addresses issues of faith and mental illness. Sometimes it gets a little honest, and I think that some words can be censored. So I recommend it with a grain of salt. And
what is the name of the book?
It's called If You Feel Too Much by Jamie Tortowski.
Did you have to read any specific books for your studies on this or any other book recommendations?
Yes. Let me pull it up so I have the author.
Because I want to read some books.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as always, we do include these in the description to help you find them a little quicker.
Yes, okay, so The Youth Worker's Guide to Helping Teenagers in Crisis. This is by Rick Van Pelt and Jim, and the little symbols blocking the other dude's last name. But if you look up Rick Van Pelt, you'll get the other guy's name on there too. And again, that's The Youth Worker's Guide to Helping Teenagers in Crisis. And that's more specifically geared towards youth. There is also... I hate audio podcasts because I don't want there to be dead airspace. Oh, yeah, here it is. The Emergency Response Handbook, which is multiple authors. And it's supposed to be towards like small groups, but it's just good the way it is. Yeah, there's just too many authors to list. But if you look, it's from Group Publishing, and it's a Emergency Response Handbook.
Nice. Just some housekeeping announcements. If you're an Android user, get an iPhone. But also, we are now available on Google Play. So that's a really easy way. And we will be available on Spotify soon. Here's the thing. We finally submitted the podcast to Spotify, and everybody I've talked to has said If iTunes accepted you, which they did, a lot of you listen to us on iTunes, that Spotify will also accept you. It's just a matter of time. They're a little slow. But Google Play accepted us right off the bat, so.
Yay.
So.
Well, also Google Store accepts like any app in the world also. So.
Yeah, that's what's great about Google Play. So, we hope that you'll join us again next week on Theology Thursday.
Bye.